This is the Gauntlet Podcast. My name is Jason, and I am here with Josh Fox from Black Armada Games. Hi, Josh. Welcome back to the podcast.
Hey, Jason. It's great to be here.
So we are going to talk about your new game, Flotsam. Am I pronouncing that correctly? Flotsam?
Flotsam, yeah, I think so.
That's a word I've always read but never spoken.
You know what? I'm the same, so I hope that there aren't sailors kind of laughing at us right now.
Awesome. Well, okay, so Flotsam, give our listeners an overview of the game. What is it about?
Okay, so the full title is Flotsam, Adrift Amongst the Stars. And it's a game about outcasts, misfits and renegades living in the belly of a space station in the shadow of a more prosperous society. It's about their everyday lives, their interpersonal relationships and small-scale drama against a backdrop of poverty, gang conflict, and also kind of supernatural weird stuff, the oppressive society above, and so on.
Awesome. So just in terms of the mechanics, tell us a little bit about the mechanical framework of the game. What are players meant to be doing in it?
Okay, you divide your time between controlling your primary character, which is just like you would in a normal kind of GM'd game. You have this single character who you can focus your attention on and really develop them as a character and delve into their relationships in detail. You also will spend time controlling a situation, which is a constellation of threats and issues which are affecting the lives of the primary characters. You could call it GM-less or you could call it GM full. Effectively, you get a bit of both. You spend time being a GM. In effect, you spend time being a player. So mechanically, the system is based on token exchange. So generally, the game follows the kind of theory of role-playing as a conversation, right? I describe what I'm saying and doing. You describe what you're saying and doing, and some third persons maybe describing the backdrop and the scenery and so on, and what NPCs are up to. And so that proceeds in a very free-form way, as you'd expect. But there are moments where you can use the system to kind of force the game in a particular direction, and those controls are generally in the hands of the person playing their primary character. So they can activate a weakness, which will basically an invitation to the other players to make trouble for them in some way. And in exchange for doing that, they get a token. Later on, they might spend that token to activate a strength, which then allows them to take control of the narrative and have their character be cool and competent. So that's kind of the main, I guess you would say, conflict resolution side of the system. And in addition to that, there's an XP mechanic which runs alongside that and nudges you to push your relationships out of their equilibrium. So you basically get to mark XP against a relationship if you show something of your true self in such a way that the other character, your relationship with the other character is changed.
Interesting. Yeah. I was led to believe from our brief back and forth over email and also just kind of watching you talk about the game on G Plus and things that there are some Powered by the Apocalypse inspirations or elements. Is that true?
That is right, but it is very much not a standard PBTA game.
Okay.
So it uses the idea of principles to guide the style of play. So the way I like to think about principles, and this is, I think, a bit different from what some PBTA games do, I like to think of principles as telling you how you play the game as opposed to the mechanics which tell you what you must do, right? So the game has 6 principles which apply to both regardless of whether you're playing your primary or your situation, you're using the same 6 principles to kind of guide the style of the game and push it towards this kind of small scale drama between characters focused on their relationships. So that's one aspect of PBTA. And I guess another aspect is playbooks. So it uses playbooks much in the same sort of style as a PBTA game, but without all of the custom moves. It's a little bit more nudged back towards the list of abilities, list of weaknesses, without having to read a custom move. But it does have a set of basic moves which kind of just describe to you. There's a little bit more to it than that, but you know, that it's stripped back really compared to a lot of other PBTA. It's kind of stripped back to the basic moves and basic principles, all of the other stuff that's built up around that.
You know, I find that so fascinating because something I'm noticing a lot, paying attention to what game designers are doing, and our space, the Gauntlet, being very, very fond of Powered by the Apocalypse games. I'm very interested in the people who are trying to either recontextualize or strip down or mix up the idea of like what a Powered by the Apocalypse game is. My own game that I'm working on comes out of like my very deep experience with the system and with the underlying mechanics. It does a lot of that, right? Like there's a very like reassessing what PBTA is. I think that, Dream Askew's been around for a while, but, I think that's another game that like really kind of pulls apart and plays with this idea of like what a PBTA game is. I'm curious just to get your thoughts, maybe sort of cosmically or big picture, I don't know, about like PBTA as a design space, because I think that there are some people who sort of feel like, maybe Blades in the Dark is the cool new thing to hack, or, there are other, maybe PBTA is a dead end creatively or whatever. Like, what are your thoughts just generally about PBTA?
Oh man, I definitely could not disagree more with the idea that it's a dead end.
Oh, same here. Yeah, absolutely. I'm completely with you on that.
Yeah, Blades in the Dark, for me, Blades in the Dark takes things a different direction. I am interested in streamlined mechanics. So I think a lot of PBTA games have started to kind of add more layers of detail and subsystems to the core. And I find that quite hard work, really. Like for me, the more subsystems you add on, the more I'm kind of sitting there as a GM or as a player kind of going, yeah, let me just, I instead of kind of immediately responding to what people say to me in the fiction, I'm picking up the rule book and I'm leafing through it, kind of going, page 53, that's the rules on, and that kind of brings me back into that, a space I associate with trad games that, it's kind of what I'm trying to get away from, if I'm honest with you. I don't want to be critical of anybody's games. That's just kind of my personal preferences.
No, I'm definitely with you on that. I mean, my sense is that I think to some degree there's like a marketing thing going on. This is totally, just a guess really. But my sense is that Powered by the Apocalypse is a thing that indie designers can do that has like a lot of, if you put that label on your project, it has a lot of power as far as Kickstarter goes. But yes. I also think that there's a marketing aspect of where my game needs to have the most playbooks and the most basic moves and the most stuff, right? And I think that kind of gets to what you were saying about subsystems. I'm noticing that a lot as well. And I am way more interested in the more scaled back version of Powered by the Apocalypse. One thing that you actually wrote on G Plus probably 100 years ago, it's been at least 2 or 3 years ago. But in any case, you wrote that GM moves to some degree, and I'm really boiling it down here, but GM moves to some degree are just do something that would be of interest to someone at the table. Right?
Yeah.
And I believe that wholeheartedly. And I've actually used that as a way of sort of explaining and like mentoring, for lack of a better word, like people who are new to GMing Powered by the Apocalypse games. But I think there's something like, to some degree, like, just do something that would be interesting to someone, like it's a little pithy, right? Like, I mean, to some degree, but it's like really powerful and insightful, I think, because it's kind of what it is, right? I mean, these are just frameworks for telling story, for negotiating a conversation, and occasionally arbitrating like conflict, right? So I'm not sure that like more is more in Powered by the Apocalypse. I mean, I'm with you on that for sure.
That's interesting that you say that. I totally, obviously I wrote it, so I totally agree with that.
Well, you could have changed your mind since then, right?
I mean, I haven't, but I think what I would say is I really like the way that some PBTA games make their moves and principles feel specific and tell you something about the genre that you're in.
Sure.
And the cleverest PBTA games do that without kind of expanding it in huge detail. You've not kind of got 100 principles. You've got half a dozen principles, but they're really good ones that really, you read them and you're instantly like, yeah, okay, I know what this is about now. And that's a real skill, I think. But to answer your question about, is PBTA still a kind of a valuable design space? I think so. And I think what amazes me about PBTA is how I almost can't get away from it now. If I'm writing a particular kind of game, it's not for every game, but the kind of game where you have characters who are trying to to make their way in the world and overcome obstacles, and therefore you maybe need a figure like a GM who's going to push danger and difficulty at the players and make their lives interesting. In that kind of game, it's just such a powerful structure, a really simple central mechanic for handling chance, a smart way of breaking down the kind of how do you play into those principles, a great way to differentiate the characters using the playbooks. All of those tools are so good, and I have from time to time found myself irritated by how much I want to design in PBTA, and I'm thinking, can't I just do something new? But it's a great framework. I can't knock it because it works.
I have a similar feeling on the play side, right? I mean, we organize, probably something like 140, 150 games a month, right? And a lot of those are powered by the Apocalypse games. And I sometimes, I look at the calendar and I'm like, oh, Jesus, I wish we could maybe do something different, right? Like it's just all PBTA all the time around here. But at the end of the day, those are the games we like to play. That's important. And also, like you said, I mean, the things that make it like really strong from a sort of and captivating from a design standpoint and all the problems it solves translates to play directly, right? In my opinion, it's a really easy way of playing. In fact, I've always thought that this sort of like brilliant thing that Meg and Vincent did is they just managed to codify like what was essentially just good table culture and good table behavior, right? And create a framework for people to sort of like get good play at their table. And so, yeah, it has, I think it's like sort of hold on the indie side of the hobby is for a reason, right? Like there's something there.
Definitely. I think what I would like to see from PBTA really, although there's this huge variety of PBTA games out there dealing with a wide variety of genres and genre trappings, they all kind of feel like they're trying to do a similar kind of role-playing, a similar approach to role-playing, but I feel like that framework could be applied to other approaches. Like, I mean, for example, I'm going to talk about something now that I know nothing about, okay, so I may come off as a complete dickhead as a result, but the OSR, when I read about the OSR, it's an area of role-playing that really fascinates me because I know nothing about it. I read about people talking about the approach where the GM is almost trying to kill you, but they're not allowed to just come out and do it, right? They have to work within the fictional setup that they've created. Nobody, to my knowledge, and I know there's this Vagabonds of Diffed game that I've yet to try, may have done this, but to my knowledge, nobody has taken the structures of PBTA and said, hey, could you use that to write a game where instead of the GM trying to be a fan of you, they're trying to kill you.
Right, yeah.
A completely different style of game, but using those tools would be of real interest to me. And I'd love to see people playing in that space a bit more.
One of the things that on my other show, Fear of a Black Dragon, which is an OSR podcast, well, it's an OSR podcast, but many OSR people don't think it is. One of the things that Tom and I do, my host is Tom McGrenery on that show. One of the things that Tom and I do is we go through an OSR module, we break it down. But then what we do in the second segment is we talk about how you can use like indie game principles and story game principles to sort of enhance play or enhance your experience with the module, right? And one of the things that we've discovered is to some degree, story games, indie games, powered by the Apocalypse games, however you want to categorize them, and OSR, they're in a lot of ways, they're not that different. There's mostly just a lot of like what is considered, a good GM in an OSR game, that's a GM that like makes calls on the fly and who kind of like just makes judgments, like, and doesn't get too bogged down in the rules. A lot of like in my opinion, what indie games and particularly powered by the Apocalypse games do is they just put a mechanical framework around that kind of thinking. And so what Tom and I have found, we run through these modules using World of Dungeons, which is John Harper's very, very stripped down version of Dungeon World. And they play the same, we still go through the module. We still go through all the encounters. We do all the stuff and we get to the end. And so I think that there are a lot more similarities between these two perceived branches of game design and thought than a lot of people realize, and he and I have been exploring that space a lot this year. Or ever since the show launched. So, just kind of throwing it out there. But yeah, this idea of like, can you have a principle of instead of be a fan of the characters, like try to kill them. I think that's being a fan of the characters in that context, right? To some degree.
Yeah, I guess so. But you probably don't feel like the GM's being much of a fan of you at the point that they murder you. So it's definitely a different approach, right? Kind of, I'm not trying to make your character look cool necessarily. I'm trying to be honest in how your decisions are interacting with the fiction. And if that means you die, then you die.
Absolutely. Well, let's go back to Flotsam, which is what we're here to talk about. So Flotsam. Okay, so it is not nearly a traditional or standard Powered by the Apocalypse game. Do you have anything else you want to say about that as far as like ways that it sort of breaks that mold or things it's doing mechanically?
Well, so I think, you mentioned Dream Askew, and it's very much in the same space as Dream Askew. In fact, it started life as a Dream Askew hack. So anyone who's played that game, and I love that game, Dream Askew is one of my favourite role-playing games of all time, probably, will be kind of familiar with what it's trying to do. But as mentioned, it kind of strips things back a bit more in terms of having a core system, and it has this relationship-based mechanic, which hopefully develops a longer-term arc in terms of how your characters are going to interact with each other, and their relationships are going to develop and change over time.
As you've described the game, you mentioned that it's this sort of like people who are living on this space community that's adjacent to this bigger, more, prosperous community. A couple of questions about your design goals here. This sounds like a sort of universal theme. And so I guess what I'm asking is like, why space? What is it about the setting that helps convey your design goal or like your thematic goal that you're trying to accomplish here?
Yeah. So mostly, if I'm completely honest with you, is because I just fucking love space. That's what inspires me. I haven't written a whole lot of space-based games yet, but that is largely an error on my part. I need to write more of those because I love them very much. So this is partly just it's a genre I like. I guess at a very kind of metaphorical level, the reason it's called Flotsam is because the characters are kind of adrift on the tide, right? They're people who have lost control of their own destiny in a way, and the game's systems encourage the story to kind of drift along in that same way. And all of that feels like it meshes quite well with the idea of it's a space station. So it's kind of, imagine a space station in the mold of Deep Space Nine or Babylon 5, where things get washed in on the tide. You're at the margin between various interesting areas of space, other civilizations, and so on. You get affected by big events outside yourself. And so again, you kind of feel like you're adrift on the tide. I don't know, that all works for me. I don't know whether that's a very coherent answer. I could totally have written the same game for other genres I like Bronze Age, Village, I don't know what, but one of the things that I find about PBTA that's interesting is it drives you to create quite specific playbooks and specific, for this type of game, specific situations. So you can't just kind of make it generic. You have to make it specific. And so I chose space because that's the kind of specific I like.
Well, let's talk about some of the situations in your playtesting or whatever, kind of scenarios are available. What are some of the sorts of like conflicts or points of drama or just what do the characters get up to, I guess?
Right. So it really varies hugely from game to game, because in each game, the players will choose which situations they want to control and therefore what they're bringing to the fore. I'll just tell you what the situations are. That might help to illustrate what I'm talking about. You have the gangs and you have poverty, and those are both kind of exist in a space that could almost just be any inner city community. It wouldn't need to be in space at all. You can be telling quite almost mundane stories, right? There's the outside and the spirits, which kind of brings in alien stuff and supernatural stuff into your story. There's the above, which is the upper decks of the space station where the prosperous people live, whose merest sneeze causes the whole of the below to catch a cold, right? And that's one of my favorite ones because it brings in some real political stuff. There's always great stuff about how the above might be a totalitarian state, or it might be capitalist very powerfully capitalist state and all the influence that can have on people who don't have the levers of power. And so which of those you choose very much shapes the kind of story you're going to get. I have played in games where the story has focused on supernatural elements. Let me tell you one game where the space station that the characters lived on had been created by this alien race hundreds of years ago, and they'd been chased out of the station by humans. So now it's occupied by humans, and they don't really understand how the space station works. And there's kind of weird AI type technology that to them seems like spirits, even though it's technologically based, and some quite threatening kind of themes around the station's defense systems potentially coming along and causing problems for the characters. But equally, at other times, it's been very much focused on those smaller scale stories around characters who are in debt, characters who are entangled with a gang and the way that they're unable to get out from under that. Stuff about resistance. We've had stories about characters who are trying to resist the dominance of the above and struggling with powerful forces of authority. So you get a real variety.
No, that's great. Well, so, it seems like you're working with a lot of themes that have a lot of real world mirrors and application. I'm curious if there's something going on sociopolitically in your consciousness or as a part of your job or a part of just your daily life that inspired this. Why write this game right now?
Well, I guess the first thing to say is I didn't write it right now. It's actually
fair enough. Yeah, it's
been on my back burner for a while we were dealing with Lovecraft-esque and then having very young kids take up our time. So it's been waiting for me to finish it off for a long time. So I guess you might be looking at those themes and thinking, oh, this is a reaction to certain recent political events. And I guess those might have been thrust a bit more to the forefront of my thinking, but it wasn't a direct reaction to that. Yeah, I don't know. I guess I think I could have written this game at any time, really.
Pretty universal stuff, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
No, it's fine. I mean, I just, I think that one of the things that I'm seeing a lot lately, just in design space and the indie side of the hobby especially, is just this really intense frustration with sort of political situations all over the world, the rise of very nationalistic, populist sort of ideas and things like that. And of course the shit show we have going on over here. And I think that there's this desire to want to do something, do the thing you do in response, right? And so it seems like there's a lot of game design going on that's trying to create space to interrogate these issues and things like that. So I was just curious if something like that was going on. But I also take the the point that these are just universal things, that we've been dealing with a lot of this crap forever.
Yeah, I think for sure that sort of thing is coming out in our play. Playing the game, I'm seeing that coming to the foreground, but I just don't think I'm not sure I'm brave enough to directly try and design a game to address those themes. Although I guess we could say the Big H kind of...
I love the Big H.
Kind of did that a bit.
Yeah. So for listeners, you may know about this. If you subscribe to our zine or our Patreon, rather, you do. The Big H, well, I guess I could just ask you what it is, but I'll just say the Big H it's a game that we published it's a game of Josh's we published in Codex. I think it's in Decay, about this big Superman kind of superhero whose sort of moral compass goes astray, and he sort of imposes his totalitarian worldview or an oppressive worldview that's built out of this benevolence, right, onto the world. And you play superheroes who looked up to the Big H and who are now trying to reclaim and fight back. I thought that was very political, right? It felt really, wow, of the moment,
Yeah. So when I deny that I'm willing to grapple with those themes, I guess that's a lie. But in a way, I just love games that get into that kind of political space, even without necessarily intending to comment on real world politics, because you can play the Big H. You can criticize any political ideology through that game. I think at this time in history, it's very easy to see it as a commentary on totalitarian approaches, but I think you could use it to get into maybe liberal, overweening liberal values. You could probably get into, I think, kind of in what does it, if you've got that level of power, is it okay to impose your liberal values on other people, I think you could probably get into that space if you wanted to. So I think it probably feels more like it's in the space of criticizing current events because of the fantastic art that you guys got for it, that really gave it a kind of blending superhero themes with fascist imagery. It was absolutely beautiful.
Yeah, Jesse's art was great in that. That was our free issue for a long time, and it was downloaded thousands of times. So there's a good chance, listeners, you have this in your collection. Go play the Big H. Go run the Big H. I think we're running on a Gauntlet Hangouts. I'm pretty sure Tyler is running it. I'm pumped about I want to play it. I still want to play it. It's like way top of my list of things to do. So I want to ask you really quickly before we move on to the Kickstarter stuff, especially, I want to ask you about the relationship mechanic. You've mentioned it a couple of times about it being sort of a core thing. Like, how does it work?
The relationship mechanic is based around the same sort of accumulating points towards a tracker that PBTA games tend to do, but instead of having a single tracker, it's attached to each of your relationships and also to the flaws that your character has. So every time you do something to expose one of your flaws, you get to put a tick against that flaw. Every time you have an interaction with the other person who your relationship connects to that meaningfully changes your relationship, you get a mark against that relationship. And when you've got up to 3, and why 3 instead of 5? Basically, I just found it took too long. 3 seems to be about the right pace for a game of this type. When you get up to 3, you stop and you assess how the relationship has changed overall. So, we've had 3 interactions, each of which is significant in its own way. And what I have written on my character sheet is maybe, I don't quite trust Jason. I think he might be out to get me. But after 3 ticks, I go, Jason is my right-hand man. Maybe you've moved position completely, or it might have developed more gradually than that. But the point is that every so often you're reassessing and reevaluating the relationship. It's just a prompt for you to do that in the quieter time between scenes.
Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah, that sounds awesome. Okay, so Flotsam, Kickstarter. I assume you were making the round to Kickstarter. I think you said you're launching in July. So listeners, by the time this comes out, the Kickstarter will probably be just underway or in the middle of it. So tell us about the Kickstarter. What are the planned pledge levels? What are you hoping to accomplish there?
Okay, so it's a fairly standard Kickstarter in the sense that I've written the game, so it's done. That's kind of how I do Kickstarter, and it's only my second one, but it's part of my philosophy of Kickstarter is write the game, eliminate that element of risk. I don't want to be the guy who puts a Kickstarter out there, gets a load of money, and then says, I've lost my mojo and I can't write it now, or I've been hit by a bus or whatever. So it's done. So what it's paying for is art, it's paying for layouts, it's paying for, hopefully, if I get enough money, it will pay for a print run rather than having to do print on demand. That'd be nice. And we've got, oh my goodness, this gorgeous art I'm seeing already, getting my art samples in. By the time this comes out, you'll be able to see them on the Kickstarter page. There's a fantastic cover by an artist, a Swedish artist called Anna Landin. I don't know if you've come across her.
No.
So she has done this fantastic front cover where we see these characters who look very sort of representative of the game, having an intense discussion over a little table with a big round window onto space in the background. And if you flip onto the back cover, then you'll see the same scene from the outside of the spaceship.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, that's really good.
Sorry, space station. Yeah, it looks great. I'm so excited about it. And so Anna is doing the cover, some of the interior art, and we've got Claudia Canghini also do the other half of the art. I mean, people be familiar with her work and obviously love the work that she's done.
Yeah, Claudia's great
for other games. So
awesome.
Yeah, in terms of reward levels, I'm still kind of nailing down the last of those. I'm hoping that we'll be able to have some nice options for people to do some art direction or put their portrait into the game like other games have done. And I don't want to say you'll find out when this goes out whether I've managed to make some sort of deluxe edition happening. It's turning out to be very difficult to manage the costs on that.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that you mentioned, we kind of mentioned in passing earlier, was this idea of, you could just reskin the setting to be like in an inner city or something like that. Are you thinking about reskins, possibly stretch goals or anything like that?
Yeah. So there will be what I've done. The game is kind of optimized for campaign play. That might have been apparent from what I was talking about in terms of relationship development, but I wanted to make it possible to play it as a one shot. So my stretch goals that I've currently got envisaged are about creating a very charged set of starting relationships and characters that you can just jump straight into, and a really full-fleshed setting so that you don't have to do all the work of kind of setting that up at the beginning. You can just get playing right from the word go. So on that basis, I'm looking at specific kind of spaceship styles.
Okay.
I am waiting for some of my stretch goal authors to tell me what exactly they're doing, but I'll tell you one because I've got the details on that. I'm excited about it. So Grant Howitt is down to do a space station he is called Terpsichore's Vaunt.
That really sounds like something he would do. That's good.
Yeah, it's great. So I think it's fair to say this is perhaps more of a spaceship than a space station. It's like this floating hulk with the prosperous society living on the outside and the have-nots living on the inside, kind of like a hollow world almost. So that just sounds so cool and evocative to me. I'm really looking forward to it. I will be interested to see whether any of my stretch goal authors propose to do a reskinning. That will require a bit more work because of the need to think outside the box of the existing playbooks and so on. I would be so on for that if anybody wanted to reskin it. But at the moment, we're looking at kind of, let's see, can we have a station that feels a bit like Babylon 5? Can we have one that feels a bit like Warhammer 40,000 or, real different approaches?
Yeah, that makes sense. So Josh, the campaign is going on right now. When does it conclude, approximately?
So the campaign is 30 days long. It's due to conclude on the 9th of August, which I think is a Thursday.
Awesome. Is there anything else you want to say about Flotsam?
No, I think okay. Let me sort of give you my final pitch, if you like. What I would say about Flotsam is, if you think that you'd love to play a GM-less game, but you just think that your group can't quite handle it, it requires too much creativity from everybody, or it's too much like hard work. I'm not trying to be kind of rude about anyone here, but I hear a lot of people say that about GM-less games. Flotsam gives you a lot of support. It holds your hand the whole way. I had one of my playtesters said it felt like taking a small step towards GMing. And that made me very happy, because that's kind of what I aspire to in a GM-less game, is for it to feel so easy, so straightforward, that you no longer feel like GMing is a terrifying experience only for the rock stars of this world. And I hope that's what Flotsam does. So if you're interested in giving it a try, but you've been put off by fear and self-doubt, Flotsam can help you with that.
Awesome. So Josh, what else do you have coming up? Just maybe if you want to give us a heads up of what Black Armada, you and Becky possibly are working on.
I would love to. So I'll talk first about something Becky's working on. I'm really excited about. I think some of the people on the Gauntlet community seem to be quite excited about it too. It's called Bite Me.
Oh, the werewolf game, right?
Yeah, that's right. It's a game of werewolf pack dynamics. So it's another PBTA game, a bit more traditional, I suppose, in that it uses the standard 2d6 mechanic and so on. But it's an extremely sharp game, really focused on that kind of, what would it feel like to be in a wolf pack? How would it feel to have your pack brothers and sisters have that incredibly close relationship? It's another game that's very relationship focused, very emotionally focused. And it's kind of about iterating between fighting against external threats, going out there and kicking ass as a werewolf, versus dealing with the internal strife of your pack, and how at times you might be at each other's throats, and what it will take for you to forgive each other.
Awesome.
It looks so good. She's been working on it for a while, and I know she's intending to kickstart it at the back end of this year, subject to further playtesting. So that's Bite Me. Watch out for that. I think that's going to be really good. I am working on a game that is kind of It's difficult to give it a title at the moment because it's based on a particular piece of intellectual property that I'm not going to name.
That might make it difficult to explain what it is.
Yeah. I'm calling it, the working title at the moment is Last Fleet. And it is about the remnants of humanity after a terrible atrocity, fleeing across space, pursued by an inhuman adversary that have infiltrated the fleet.
So Battlestar Galactica.
Yeah, it does sound a bit like that, doesn't it?
No, I love it. That's not a criticism or a call out. I love it. I think it's great. I just watched it, actually.
And you can see I've gone for the space theme again. But that's kind of inspired by Night Witches. It's inspired by The Watch. It's inspired by certain science fiction TV shows, and I'm very excited about it. That's
a very specific science fiction TV show.
Right. But I mean, yeah, absolutely. You will play characters who are under enormous pressure, feel the pressure building up, and ultimately exploding into kind of brief periods of irrational or ill-disciplined behavior against a backdrop of this kind of paranoia about who might be operating within the fleet, the potential panic about will the fleet fall apart under the pressure. So it's kind of in early play testing, but I'm very excited about it. Cool. And enjoying testing it very much.
Awesome. Well, that all sounds great. Just a reminder, listeners, about the Flotsam Kickstarter. We'll have links to that in the show notes. Go check it out. Let's go to Give Me Life. Hello, listeners. I have a couple of things I want to tell you about. The first is that GauntletCon 2018 is coming October 18th through the 21st. GauntletCon is an online convention featuring games, panels, and contests. The event is free for our Patreon supporters, but no fears if you're not a Patreon supporter. There will be a registration process available soon for non-Patreon folks. Please note, however, that Gauntlet Patreon supporters are allowed to register for game events before everybody else. The second thing I want to tell you about is Codex Chrome 2, the newest issue of our fantastic indie RPG zine. It features Veil 2020, a slimmed-down retro-future version of the popular game The Veil, designed to be played with old Cyberpunk 2020 and Shadowrun adventures. Full Throttle, a rules supplement and starter scenario for the outlaw biker gang game 1%er. Body Hack, a one-player journaling game by Kira McGran about learning to live with your new cybernetic body part, and 36 cyberware glitches and malfunctions. To get Codex Chrome 2, just make a $4 or higher pledge on our Patreon at patreon.com/gauntlet by the end of July. And back issues, as always, are available on DriveThruRPG. Thanks. It's Giving Me Life. I think I'll start. So my sister just had a baby. Actually, both my sisters did. But my one sister just had a baby, and she lives nearby. And her husband is off on like a 6-month training thing, like right when the baby, like right after the baby was born. And so she finds herself needing a lot of help with the baby because she's never had a kid before. It's the first kid in our family. I myself haven't been around children in years. Like this new baby, my nephew, is the first person under the age of like 25 I've interacted with in probably like a decade, right? So I'm exaggerating there, but so it's really interesting to have this like baby, and I really love it. Like I love spending time with my nephew. It is just it's just a joy. I love that I get him during like all the good times, you know, like she has to do all the changing and crying at night and all that crap, but like I get to just like swoop in and be Uncle Jason and during
That is so right, isn't it?
During happy moments, yeah.
We have 2 young children, and we frequently reflect on how nice it must be to be a grandparent or other relative, to be able to swoop in and
enjoy them,
have a great time with the kids, and then fuck off just as they start to, you know, demand their dinner or whatever. You know,
yep. It's great. So yeah, that's Giving Me Life. Josh, what's giving you life?
Oh, so I wanted to talk about El Ministerio del Tiempo, okay? that I don't know. I'm going to say this is a little known show. I don't know whether that's true, but I've not seen anyone else talking about it. You can find it on Netflix. It's a Spanish time travel program. Okay. It is about the Spanish Ministry of Time. They have all of these doors which go to different time periods, and they go out there and try to stop people from meddling in Spanish history. Okay. It's amazing. The characters are so good, so well realized, and feel so different from anything that you can get in. I mean, Spain is Western, right? But it feels very different from Western traditions to me in terms of what the characters are like and what the stories are like. And it is also just fascinating to see Spanish history from a Spanish perspective. Their idea of what is a significant historical event is subtly different from what a British person might regard as significant. Or they're in the same space, but like you or I might think the most significant bad guys of history are the Nazis. Okay, that's probably something that Western TV generally agrees on. To judge from El Ministerio del Tiempo, I think they think it's Napoleon.
Oh, really? How interesting.
Yeah, really interesting to see how they relate to Napoleon. But it's great. It's just a very accessible piece of other culture told through the lens of a genre that I find very easy to consume. So
yeah, no, that's great. It seems like if they can travel in time, they should just go back and sort out the whole Spanish Armada business, like crashing against the shores of England. It'd be way better, right?
Yeah, absolutely. But that's their whole job. It's very much like, hey, what's that other show that does something very similar?
Is it that one Emily Care Boss loves and tweets about 900 times a day?
That's
Timeless.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes, Timeless. So I understand that Timeless may have been subject to some sort of lawsuit from El Ministerio del Tiempo.
Oh, interesting. I didn't know that. Yeah.
Del Tiempo, actually, so which I presume means that it predates Timeless, but it's got a similar sort of theme to it in that the main character's job is to preserve history, not mess around with it.
No, that's great. I'm fairly certain Emily probably knows about this show, but we should probably point her in the direction of it regardless, because she's very heartbroken about Timeless being canceled, I think.
It definitely provides a similar sort of hit to Timeless, so people who like Timeless should go and watch it immediately. I should get royalties for this show, really, shouldn't I?
For my money, my favorite time travel thing is Doctor Who, which stands as the greatest cultural innovation of your people.
I love Doctor Who, yeah. Very different to El Ministerio, but great show nonetheless.
Awesome. Well, Josh, thanks so much for being on the show.
That's great to be on, and very much enjoy talking to you.
And listeners, that's our show. If you want to get in touch with us, we can be found in several places. We're on Twitter at GauntletRPG. So you can tweet at us there if you wish. We are on G+. Just go to the community section of G+, and search for The Gauntlet. You will find us. We have a website. It's gauntlet-rpg.com. And we have a Patreon at patreon.com/gauntlet. Josh, thanks again. And listeners, thanks for tuning in. Take care.